بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم ولعن أعداهم أجمعين من الآن إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum to those of you who are joining gradually. So good to have you here. Assalamu alaikum to those who are listening on Instagram, IGTV later. You are as much a part of this community as anyone. And assalamu alaikum to those who listen to the podcast via YouTube or Spotify or Apple or any of the other places. You're also welcome. So assalamu alaikum to everyone. Alaikum salam. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining. We are so nice to be back doing podcast at night. I feel like last few days we've been doing it in between A'mal and Majalis. Alaikum salam, sister. But A'mal and Majalis, like, it's not been the same. So it's good to have you guys here, inshallah. Let me get going. Our guest today is a very special person in the community and to me personally, said Hadi Rizvi. How do I make sure he joins at a time that we need? By the way, those who are listening, how's my voice? Does it sound okay? Because I've got a different setup at the moment. I'm not at home. Does the sound, is it okay to you guys? Please do let me know in the comments if it's too loud or too quiet. I don't know. In any case, assalamu alaikum to those of you joining. I was just saying, if my voice is okay, please let me know if you can hear me clearly because I'm using a different setup. You can? Okay. Man, thank you so much, sister. Really appreciate it. All right, where's Sayyid Hadi? He's meant to be joining. I really hope he joins soon, inshallah. He's texted me saying, I'm ready when you are. Indeed, but where is he? So, inshallah, we'll have him joining imminently. How are you guys doing? How's Shahr Ramadan going? How are the nights of A'mal? Inshallah, they are accepted. But how have your Layal Qadr been? I think in most time zones, the nights of Qadr have happened, or at least the 23rd night has happened. There are, of course, other nights. So, inshallah, you are well, and all your du'at are accepted. If anyone's near Sayyid Hadi in North Carolina, why not just go and knock on his door and let him know? Hang on, let me respond to this text once. He'll be joining soon, inshallah. That's awesome. In literally about minutes. Salam Agha Hassan, good to have you here, inshallah. Always blessed to have you. Salam Brother Abdullah, one of the regulars of the podcast since the beginning. So nice to have you here, dear brother, inshallah. Said Hadi is joining. Alaikum salam, brother. He gave a very good excuse why we have to stick to the timing for today's podcast, and I stuck to it. I had my food very quickly and everything, but I think he'll join in a few seconds. Salam Tanvir, good to see you. Have you here, Azizi, man. Agha Hassan, Roshandale. Agha Hassan, why not just buzz Said Hadi to get joining? I'm sat so near where his family live as well, which is, an extra bonus. Sayyid, I see you. I'm inviting you now to the... And then you come and join, inshallah. Alaikum salam, Asma. Alaikum salam. Sayyidna salam.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I can't see you. Is this the... now I can. Alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, how are you? How's everything?
I know you're far from South London because you haven't got a fade. I can just tell instantly.
Yeah, I've got an appointment on the weekend just before Eid, per tradition.
It has to be done, right?
Keeping up with the sunnah.
Well, if you're coming on a podcast with someone else from South London, we have a certain expectations to meet. So, I mean...
Yeah, I did think about that, but life is just too busy.
For such frivolities. Guess what part of town I'm in right now? Guess.
The radiator told me you're somewhere near Balham.
Oh my God, that is... How did you know I'm in Balham?
The radiator gave that vibe to me.
That's a madness. I actually am in Balham. I don't know how you could tell. Wow, I'm almost unnerved now how you did that. Is there any power you've...
No, power.
Tell me where I was. I know you have a lot of Americans who listen to your stuff. Could you explain to them what Balham, Tooting, what these things are, just so they understand where we're from?
So both of these are areas within South London. So what we have Wandsworth is a borough. Boroughs over here, I think, would be similar to the county or the township, I guess. It could be the township. No, sorry, it'd be the county because it's larger than the township. The township would be... I'm mixing it up. But yeah, it's just... They're parts of a larger area.
And nice
and
parts,
vitamin
I should
T
mention,
next to
right?
each other.
Like good parts of town, right?
Definitely, a lot better than when we were growing up, at least.
Oh man,
They're getting better and better. Alhamdulillah.
that's a different podcast about postcode wars. I don't think we have time to go into that today. Better not. How is the month of Ramadan going for you? How are the nights of Qadr? How's your family? How's life?
Alhamdulillah, it's good. Life is good. Shahr Ramadan's been wonderful. I actually missed a few days of fast because I got COVID in,
Take it out.
yeah, in between. But Alhamdulillah, everything's good. Family's well. Layli Qadr is coming to the end of the 23rd day for us. You guys already in, you've done iftar, right?
Yeah, I was not gonna have my food in front of you out of respect for the time zones, but
Oh no, that's fine.
it was chicken, roast chicken, and with like the masala as well. If you were interested.
MashaAllah. Jejun, as they say, bon appetit.
Thank you, Sayed. No. Do you cook your own iftar these days, or what? Are you? Knowing you probably are doing something.
Yeah, so I mean, it depends. I haven't had to. My wife just went to California a few days ago, Saturday. But she had cooked enough for us not to have to. But I will be cooking tonight for
Do you pray for the
tomorrow.
children, or?
I mean, pray that they eat. But I'm less worried about the taste than I am about them actually eating.
Oh. Yeah, inshallah, it's okay. Inshallah, the nutrients make up for the, everything else. Inshallah.
So,
That's good. That's good. Thanks for doing the podcast, by the way. Really appreciate making time. You said you were doing something after. Can I say what it was? Because can I mention what you told me you were doing after the podcast?
if you want to.
So guys listening, we go live every night on Monthly Reflections. Hamza, we've got lots of different guests. I've been saying Hadi, we grew up in the same town. I've been trying to get him on, I say to him, let's go. And he goes, yeah, let's do it. We have to finish at a certain time because I have to help an elderly person with gardening and I have a very strict deadline. I don't get what that means. How can you have a strict deadline? Who's this older person? What are you gardening?
I'm helping them. They're getting compost brought to their house and they have an injury, so they can't really shovel the compost. And the people at the compost place refuse to bring the truck into the garden. So I told them, like, hey, just let me know and I'm going to come and shovel it for you. They're trying to make a garden bed. So we made a garden bed for my mother-in-law many years ago. And then we made our own about a few years ago. So I was just, so this person wanted to do that and they were worried about how they're going to get the help. So I said, just let me know and I'll be there. And so that's where I have to be. I told them I'll be there at 6 p.m. our time, which is, I think, 11 p.m. your time.
Reminds me of فَمَا لَكُمْ لَا تُنْصَرُونَ. What's wrong with you don't help each other? You left South London to do gardening in a different place. That's what you did.
Place, yeah. It's a noble pursuit.
Khair, inshallah. Can I ask you a question? A specific question?
Bismillah.
So I didn't say, but I didn't mention this before, but now it's on my mind. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي. This verse, today we have perfected deen for you or completed our favors upon you. With the religion of Islam is always changing and growing and our understandings keep changing. And we're going to talk about that in a little while. But what's the significance of this moment where something is complete or, it's finished or stopped? What does that moment actually mean? And obviously we'll come to the bit after in stagnation. What is that moment?
My understanding of that particular verse is that when we say we have completed the deen for you, what is being said is that we have perfected this path that now you need between you and your journey towards God. It has all the requirement and characteristics that a path would require for you to be able to reach the end of that path, to reach the goal, right? The maqsad, the destination. And for me, that's what this verse is signifying, that on this day, everything that you need to reach the goal and objective of this path that God has announced you has been revealed. It's been passed on to you, it's been given to you, it's been relayed to you, and not just to you, through the Prophet to the Ummah. It is now available to all of them. And so what does that path look like though? Is that path a set of laws? Is it a set of instructions that you do this and then you do this and you do this? Or is it a lifestyle? Is it a mentality? If you follow life with this mentality and if you follow and approach the world with this view, you will get to that final success, right? What's the whole point of the deen? The deen is to get you towards, it's a sabil ilallah. That's what the deen essentially is. And when it's complete, what it's saying is that this now has the capacity to take you from wherever you are to God. Whether you have to reframe your mind, reframe the way you look at the world, whether it's a set of actions that you need to do and those actions impact the way that you view the world, or whether it's just the values that you need now. And if you act on those values continuously, you will develop into a person and you will follow a path that will lead you to the desired objective. So it doesn't have to be a complete detailed explanation of every step and every issue that might come up, as long as it gives you the attitude and what we call, when we speak about it from a philosophical sense, or we talk about universals, it's giving you the universal or general guidelines, and then it's up to you to apply it to specifics and in particulars, right? So just because you don't have all the particulars, it doesn't contradict the fact that this is complete, because it's not the particulars that make it complete. It's your ability to take those universal and general teachings and apply them to different parts of life and different stages of your life, different circumstances within life. And that's what makes it complete, because it's giving you the answer through giving you the principles that you should abide by.
Yeah, it would also preclude that you should be using your principles for something, like there's a purpose for them. Otherwise, it's the completion is not that we've given you deen and that's it. It's for you're chasing something. And you use the word maqsad, which is an interesting word to describe the end goal or the ultimate task we are living. Do you think there is one maqsad for all of us? Do you think there are many? I know you've discussed there are many roads to God, but are there many objects we are actually chasing, or is it simply one unifying thing we all find different routes towards?
We just finished the night of Qadr, right? And there's many discussions of what that Qadr means. And one of them is the extent, the capacity of something. And interesting, for example, so one of the things that they say is it's referred to as Qadr because everything is provided with its what's required for it to reach its potential. That's decided. It's been given, or its Qadr has been decided. So the level that it can reach is being decided, right? And what we would, in a more general sense, consider sustenance, because that's essentially what sustenance is. It links to your ability. Your abilities themselves are part of your sustenance. So everyone has a capacity and everyone has their own limits. Our role, though, in life is not to compare ourselves to Zayd and Amr, Ali, Hassan, and co, right? Our goal is to fulfill our potential, to maximize what God has placed within us and the potential that He has allowed us to manifest and actualize. What we're supposed to do is make sure that we're getting that as close to 100% as possible.
Right.
So, if, for example, Zayd is able to, Zayd's potential and capacity is, let's say, to reach 100, right? And your capacity is only to reach 80, but you reach 70, and Zayd reaches 80, you're doing better than Zayd, because you've come closer to trying in actualizing your potential than Zayd does, even though Zayd's actual potential is greater than yours. So we're not judged in comparison to others. We're judged in how much we go about ensuring that we fulfill our potential and get to that 100% line within our journey.
this is obviously I get why they say in Qadr, is because they have all these a'mals and everyone is, you know, discussing which dua should we do, and some people do many in number, some do few. And the point I think there is, you know, the potential that you have for that night is different to somebody else's, and so you might gain more in one verse of contemplation than they gain in dua joshan or something else like that. I don't know if that's the context it was told to you, that's the context that I understand it in. That, you know, in Qadr you are given as much as you have potential for, not as much as comparatively others will gain.
Definitely, as much as you expect, right? Because God deals with us in terms of our expectations per some of the narrations. God is the husn zan of his servants. But also, you could have a lot of potential, but you may just not be trying to unlock that potential. You may not be striving to try and access it. So you could be sitting there and you do have the potential to contemplate on certain ayahs and certain supplications. You have the potential to go, for example, 2 hours within, you know, in that particular state, and someone else doesn't. Someone else has a baggage with them that only allows them to go so far, right? And if they go as far as they can go, they've done what was expected of them. Nothing more is expected of them. But if you don't go as far as you're supposed to go, then it doesn't matter what you achieve, you're still going to end up with hasra, with what they say is the regret on the Day of Judgment. And that's what's one idea behind the idea. Why is it the Day of Regret? It's because you're going to see what you could have achieved. And it's not just about what you could have achieved in terms of gifts and, you know, presents and ivory castles and emerald palaces and couches reclining in heaven. It's about the type of person you could have become, how much of your being you could have manifested. And because you see that and you realize that you didn't reach that, that's where you have the hasra, the regret. So yeah, people have different potentials, and we're required. But your potentials, we should be also careful not to tie our potential to how many raka'at we can do and how many dua we can recite. It should be how many du'as we can connect to, and how much of the dua we can connect to, and how much raka'ah, which can we get to reciting one raka'ah properly. And then even when I say how many du'as can you connect to, or how much of the Quran can it connect to, I'm not talking about 5 verses, 7 verses. I'm talking about, can you take one verse and really just get absorbed by it and sit by it and listen to it, and, you know, because it requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of humility. It requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of self-knowledge as well, in knowing your own capacity and knowing, you know, because sometimes we feel like, oh, I can't handle anymore, but that's not you being able to. It's not that you can't handle anymore. You just haven't been used to, accustomed to pushing yourself beyond this point of contemplation, or pushing yourself to thinking about something more difficult than something at this level, right? This is requiring you to, this ayah is pushing you, saying, okay, no, question yourself here now. Ask yourself that extra question, you know, and you know you can make this more relevant to yourself, but it's going to be scary. It's going to get uncomfortable. It's going to push you to consider how you're acting in other parts of your life. Mm-hmm. And then you say, okay, no, I've reached my capacity in terms of, but that's only your, I guess that's not the distinction we should make. There's a capacity that we set for ourselves, and there's a capacity that we actually have. And often the capacity we set for ourselves is much lower than the capacity we actually have. And the capacity we set for ourselves is usually linked to our comfort, linked to many of these other things, which are
people around us and the level that they have become accustomed to.
And those are mostly obstacles.
Yeah. It's sad because you see people settling for so little, for all those reasons you mentioned, in knowing what their own capacity is, and they often they take back so little from the time that they have. And in many ways, we could link it to religiosity in general. Their idea of religion is much more narrow than it actually is. Maybe the easy example is it's just the dhahir and ibadat, so the prayers and the physical from the prayers. the idea of going to Hajj and maybe some, traditional aspects of going to the majalis and whatever. And at some point that was called deen, or the standard of deen, and anything more than that is considered extra. Whereas in truth, like you're mentioning, even these limits themselves are way less than how much religion offers us. What is happening to us that we are becoming, and I'll use the word now, stagnated at a certain level of our understanding, and we don't push through? Like, what is it that stopped us from pushing through?
Well, part of it is the fact that we don't consider it stagnation, right? That's one element of it. We don't understand we don't understand the objective. So the way that we learn what a belief is, and this is how many beliefs are, many ideologies and beliefs, dogma, worldviews, viewpoints, opinions. Many of them are as such that you hold them and then you act in accordance with them, right? There's a set of propositions that you accept, and that's it. Once you've accepted them, you've joined a group, you've earned a label, and now you live your life as that thing. Because most of these ideologies and most of these beliefs themselves are not dynamic. But where it comes to religion, and especially monotheistic religions, we'll say, and other religions also have this element, but I'm speaking more so in relation to monotheistic religions, is that they have an inbuilt, an essential dynamic aspect to them. So Islam, for example, is not asking you to just say La ilaha illallah, right? It's asking you to live La ilaha illallah. And then when it's saying for you to live La ilaha illallah or believe La ilaha illallah, it's not asking you to believe that, to stay at a particular level of belief of La ilaha illallah. Mm-hmm. It's asking you, it's expecting you from you, and you understand this from the general encouragement, right, of the Quran and of the religious texts. As an example, for example, so many of the verses of ta'aqqul on the Quran and tadabbur of the Quran are addressed to who? The Muslims. People have already accepted the Quran and are reading it.
Yeah, that's true. It's very true. Yeah.
Yeah, so you've already accepted it, and you've accepted it as your book, and you're reading it now, and you've already accepted the religion. So we think that reading the Quran and the Quran is the pathway or the step towards the religion itself. But what we're being told now is that, I know you're Muslim and you believe that you're Muslim, or you believe that you've done taslim, but keep reading, do tadabbur. So this book that is supposed to be the proof of this religion is still asking you, not only is it asking you to read it, it's asking you look for ikhtilaf, you won't find ikhtilaf in it. If you look for ikhtilaf in it, you won't find it. It's comfortable with that challenge, right? Mm-hmm. And it wants you to read it in that manner. It wants you to read it in a way that you are, not all the time, by the way. Once you're convinced that this book doesn't have ikhtilaf, you're not supposed to constantly try to challenge the book. That's not a healthy way. But it wants you to constantly do tadabbur. Tadabbur comes from dabara, which means back, and it's talking about returning to it continuously, coming back to it. That's what tadabbur is, coming back to the book continuously. So there's it's promoting this dynamic approach. It wants you to not be stagnant or just be accepting of one view. Come back, keep thinking, think again. Tafakkur, tadabbur, ta'aqqul. And all of these are different styles. Tadabbur and ta'aqqul are different. Tadabbur is more about coming towards it again. Ta'aqqul is about using the faculties that you have and trying to bring them in harmony to the source and approach it with that harmonious state. So there's a level of the religion itself is dynamic, but we don't view it as such. So you think, okay, look, I need to teach my children that God is one and the Prophet is Muhammad and the Imams are 12. And that's the very basic you might need to do, but that teaching has to go beyond that. There's a deep understanding of what does it mean for God to be one. There's a deep understanding of what the role and the place of the Prophet is. Right? You can read ayat of the Quran about the Prophet and think, oh, subhanAllah, great person. and then you can read them, and it can really, and different things might impact this, right? Sometimes you just read about the difficulties of trying to govern a nation, trying to govern a people, and then you go and see what the Prophet was doing, and you see what he was trying to accomplish. And then at a point where sometimes you felt uncomfortable by some decisions of the Prophet regarding certain individuals or certain events, and you couldn't understand, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you act that way? All of a sudden you're in awe, and you're like, wow, he was able to act in this way. And despite this, he was able to, show this level of patience, and you show this level of tadbir and like administrative intelligence.
Yeah.
So this, when I say dynamic, I'm not just talking about like there's a religious dynamic approach where you improve yourself and you go towards that taqwa, and that helps you, and that impacts your understanding of the religious text. And then there's also your interaction with the world and your interaction with knowledge within the world, which also impacts your ability to understand the religious text. And then when you see it as dynamic in that sense, that actually my understanding can keep growing, then you don't stop at saying, okay, our goal is to open a Sunday school and get kids to believe La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. You say that our goal is to get kids to come into our school and gradually go on a journey of discovering the depth of La ilaha illallah, which is a very different goal than thinking that this is, because you're setting yourself a goal, like this is the objective. When you're saying that God is infinite, and therefore understanding him can't be, defined by finite parameters, then you're deciding that, okay, now what I need to do is not get this child or this individual in the mosque who's coming to listen to me or listen to the speaker. My job is not to get them to this particular belief, but it's to set them on a journey with the right mindset to fulfill their capacity, because their capacity might be higher than me. The Prophet said, according to some reports at the event of Ghadir, that رُبَّ حَامِلُ فِقْهٍ, right? That how many a time is there a carrier of fiqh who carries that fiqh, and fiqh means deep understanding of religion. A carrier of fiqh means that it's not saying that they're a possessor of that understanding, they're carrying that understanding. It means that they've heard something and they're taking it with them. How often is it that they take it to someone who's more who's more faqih than them, who has a deeper level of understanding than them, and they're passing it on. So this person might have heard it from someone, something profound. They might not be able to appreciate the extent of its profundity, but they take it to someone else who wasn't there, who hears something, who hears it, and they realize, wow, and they get to the depth of it, right? And a lot of the time this goes back to that dynamic aspect of how we're treating the knowledge. Sometimes with us, I keep on going on a tangent, I want to stop here, but sometimes we take something from the Ahlul Bayt and we say, okay, subhanallah, that is so, wow, it's so profound. But then you want to stop and ask, how is it profound?
Yeah.
Like, what is it doing to you right now that makes it profound? Like, what is it inspiring within you that makes it profound? Because especially now, and I don't want to say especially now, but definitely in the postmodern world, we've equated difficult sounding speech to profound speech.
Yeah.
Anything that sounds difficult or sounds unfamiliar to us,
must be highly qualified. That's what
it might be highly qualified. And then, like, wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
That's so deep. But then really, just step back and ask yourself, is it deep? Like, is it, what is actually being said?
It's creative synonyms. That's what it is.
Creative synonyms, yeah. The mudaf and the lays that are endless. And
Exactly. It's interesting, and it's nice to say that Hassan Rizvi says Assalamu alaikum, he said, because he spoke about the idea of talabul and tafakkur and the meaning of them a few days ago in the podcast. So we just discussed what those terms mean. So those who listening, that's a good thing to listen to. In giving examples, he also said, by the way, that I'm his second favorite Brit after you. I'm going to assume you're first. So this is a challenge to Sheikh Hassan Roshandale, to Sheikh Javad Shmali, that said Hassan likes him more than both of you. I just want you to know that. Anyway, this idea about deen being truly dynamic, but our understanding of it being stagnated. That's quite a lot of examples, like the sayings which are believed to have a certain understanding but not subject to experience. That's an example of it. And Quran, obviously, as well. Thank you, Said Hassan. And the Seerah as well. The theme I'm finding from you, though, is that when we're looking at how religion affects how you see the world, Islam is expecting certain experiences from us rather than being at certain levels of knowledge only. The examples you gave are all aspects where either you embody La ilaha illallah, or the way that you understand the Seerah is in a dynamic way where you understand the decision making that he's going through. You sit with him while he's thinking of these things. Or with Quran, you allow yourself to ponder on a verse to the level where you are going through a process of going from the Zahir to the Batin. And all of them, you have to go through an experience. Does Islam want us to experience certain things in the search towards the al-Maqsad?
So when we talk about Islam, we're talking about, in reality, what we're talking about is, we're talking about two journeys, right? There's that individual journey, and there's your personal journey, and then there's a communal journey, and there's that and Islam speaks to both of those, right? The Muslims as a community are one entity, and then each Muslim by themselves is a separate entity. Now, Abu Dhar and Salman have their level of Iman, and they have their level of piety, and as do the other companions. And that's their individual accomplishment and what they individually are dealing with and what they take with them. And that impacts their individual lives, that impacts their personal lives. But they also are part of the larger Muslim community. And sometimes Salman has to look at the level of the community and at what the community needs, not just what he needs on a spiritual level, but what the community needs spiritually. And he has to think in accordance to that. So when we're talking about does Islam want certain experiences, Islam does want, it seems very clear from the Quran and the Hadith that it does want us to experience certain things, right? It's saying, even to the extent, if you have Iman, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, you believe, great, come a step further, come a step higher. And this verse is constantly there. It doesn't disappear for us, like once we've read it. It's there, so it's reminding us again and again. Okay, when I come to it next year, even if I've improved myself and I've practiced the Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, the next year I come back to it and I read it again, it's still telling me, oh, you believe, or you have brought faith, bring faith. So there's a personal aspect to it, and there's a personal experience that it wants you to have. Now, what that looks like and what that is, that's a separate discussion. But there's also a communal one. And definitely, to an extent, it could be argued that you cannot maximize the personal experience without elements of the social experience. You cannot tap into elements of personal growth without elements of the communal growth. That's there. What type of experiences does it want you to have?
I didn't even ask that, but if you're going to answer it, go ahead.
No, I'm. This is a discussion. It's not even a question. I'm thinking out.
Actually a good point. Like what kind? Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And it's the same for everyone, for example, as well, or the sequence of them and the duration that you'll go through different experiences. Like, is there a template?
It's really difficult to talk about these things now because so many terms and ideas have been hijacked by modern day movements, and even well-meaning ones. Many of the self-help movements as well. They've taken some of these words and given particular meaning to them, right? And a spin to them that even when we as Muslims sometimes use them, we don't realize the connotations that they would have. We might understand them within our circles, but they have a connotation and they have a philosophy attached to them. So sometimes just trying to speak about this becomes difficult because you want to use terminology.
You end up like you're some colonial categorization flux where you can't get out of usurped language sometimes.
In the words of that's what Akala says. Sorry, he says, trying to fight colonialism with a colonized tongue.
There you go. And
But
we're
here,
going to get
yes,
too Hegelian here. Let's not go into that because
yeah, we'll stick to the. So, what type of experiences does it want you to have? What I mean this without the connotations that it might have gained in some circles right now. It wants you to have really authentic experiences. It wants you to have very genuine and honest experiences. And that's you on a personal level, right? And authenticity and genuineness and sincerity and truth, actually remove truth, authenticity, genuineness, all of these things, sincerity, look a particular way for your personal self and a particular way for the social, for your communal self, for the community. There are things which might be what you might feel is your genuine, what would be your genuine experience or your genuine reaction, your genuine interaction with an idea, with a practice. But and it's great for you, and you might be able to use that and practice that in a personal setting. But when it comes to a communal setting, um, you may not be. And we're not, when we're talking about permitted here, we're not talking about in the legal sense. We're talking about in the sense of wisdom, right? You may not be permitted per the teachings of wisdom to practice those things which you think are in line with your authentic spiritual needs in that particular time, right? Because the community brings about, there's a preservation of the community which is necessary,
yeah,
which is obligatory, both in the legal sense and in like the takwini and the tashri'i sense of what God wants and what God wills. And it's also so there's that communal responsibility that you have to pay attention to, and that might sometimes mean. So, for example, you're sitting there and you decide that you have the capacity to go and read Joshin Kabir and Fulan Dua and that surah of the Quran, but you have to look at the community. What does the community have the capacity for? And they might think that they have a capacity for something, but you, as a believer who's being who is contemplating and who's being thoughtful, you're looking at the community and you're saying this is actually damaging for them.
yeah,
This much. Like trying to do Joshin Kabir for them is maybe not going to be beneficial right now, at least the whole 100. I need to make sure that they're using this night in a particular way. So even though you might feel like I flourish and I soar when I read Joshin Kabir, you might realize that actually for this particular group of friends of mine, I have to encourage them to read the first 50 and then read Munajat Imam Ali. And that's going to have a much greater impact on this group of people than us trying to do such and such amal. And
let me give another example to make the point clear. So I think it's, for example, the collective has its own identity as the group. It has its own norms and standards which define its sense of right and wrong. لكل أمة تدعى إلى كتابها. Every ummah will be raised by its own book, its own records. But the insan, you might come across your own sense of right and wrong, and you might have hujjah for it yourself. But taking that to the mainstream and announcing or discussing what you think are right and wrong, if they do contradict with the collective good, it might be harmful for the fabric of that society. Just because even though you have proof for yourself, that's not enough reason to assume everyone can bear the information at the same time. And we see examples of actually when people bring sometimes well-meaning and well-intentioned ideas in either too drastic or too quickly or too, I don't know, subjectively formed manners. You know what I mean?
yeah, and a lot of that comes down to when you set yourself as a standard, which is a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, we're not always saying Hadi, you know what I mean? Like,
and that's a good thing, alhamdulillah.
no.
Astaghfirullah. The setting yourself as a standard, and this is a mistake that many people who go on the path of personal reform and then reform of ideas, they fall into this trap and they forget that they had a very particular journey and they're still on. They forget, first of all, they're still on a journey, and they forget they had a very particular journey. But one of the most dangerous parts of that, the experience that they're having at the moment, is that they start setting themselves as the standard. Now they start seeing their understanding, they start seeing what they experience, they start seeing they start seeing their view of everything as the standard of how things are and how things should be, and that becomes dangerous, right? So, for example, they think that it was very difficult for them to find out that certain aspects of the Karbala narrative as they grew up with. Also, and these are actually very small and minor things in the larger picture of things, right?
Yeah.
Setting themselves as a standard and thinking about what helped them and what they thought was good for them. Now they decide, I'm going to take action based on this and impose something on the entire community. And that's very dangerous, right? And a lot of us, we become zealous and we forget that who said, first of all, you're still on a journey.
Yeah.
Let me tell you a story. Like I want this to be a conversation more than a thing. I was in Colmont, of course, everyone else in Colmont, but I walked into a gathering once and there was an individual there who knew one of my teachers. It was an English speaking teacher and he'd started lecturing. And this person had started lecturing after a decade to the public, right? This individual came, like we were speaking and stuff, and it so turned out that this individual that I'm now speaking to, their family member was the teacher, or they knew that other teacher. And what they said was, they said, it's too early for this person to start speaking. They weren't saying it's too early to start speaking, saying it's too early for this person to start speaking.
Interesting.
And I was like, what? This person's in Kharij? Like how much longer do you have to wait? Now, this is in 2010, 11-ish.
You're about to say now they are like a celebrity or something. And
oh, no. No, it's 2011. And I'm thinking, okay. Now I stay close with both of these individuals. Over the years, I see this person who went to Kharij, who I thought was at the end of their journey. Their ideas are changing. The methodology is changing. The perspective's changing. And by the end of it, by 2005, this person who I first met in by 2015, this person I met in 2005 had completely different ideas to the person I met in 2005.
Sure.
And wouldn't recognize the two. If they were in the same room, they would debate one another. It was a 180 turn, right? And it really got me thinking. And then I looked around and I realized that, we have to be very careful about the stances that we take, because we're not at the end of our journey. So this person, the reason I mentioned them is that they took strong stances at every point of their journey.
Right.
So when you realize you're growing and you realize, and I'm completely supportive of changing your ideas and developing them, or growing them, and I think that's a very healthy thing. I think that's what it looks like to be a living mind. But when you realize that's happening and when you realize that's what you're doing, then you also have to stop yourself and think, okay, my ideas are developing, my ideas are changing. So when I express them to other people, I have to have that in mind. And I say this to a lot of people, my friends are people I know are into reform. And I say, look, when you talk about reform, are you absolutely certain that which you're inviting to is better than that which you're taking away from?
Very good point.
Right? On an epistemic level, when we talk about epistemology, we're talking about value of belief. We give beliefs values based on the arguments the arguments that exist for that belief. If at the end of the day you're saying, oh no, that person shouldn't believe that, there's not enough argument or evidence for that, but then you're inviting them to something which is also not certain, what you're taking is inviting them from one dhanni thing, one speculative thing. Speculative is not a good translation, but we're using it for the sake of thing. One speculative matter to another speculative matter.
Yeah.
The problem here, though, is that this original speculative matter is tied to tens of intricate communal practices, relationships, and I want to mention a point here. I'll come to this further down, or soon. It's 5:16, but you're inviting them to something else speculative, right? because you set yourself as a standard, you're forgetting how complex individuals and societies and communities are.
Right.
And because you're forgetting that, and you're seeing yourself as an individual in contrast to a community, you do not see the damage that some of your good intended actions and practices can have. So yeah, going back to the question of, does God want us to have certain experiences? He does. He wants us to have personal experiences, but he also wants us to be aware of the communal experiences, and he wants our personal experiences to be realistic, reasonable, and appropriate to the level of belief that we're at. We have to be genuine, right? Don't overestimate yourself, and don't sell yourself short. He wants you to have a real experience for you at that time, and how that comes about is, it's a discussion in itself.
Yeah.
But he also wants you to remember that you have community relations and community obligations which you have to keep in mind. And there's very few times where you're going to have to pull Nabi Ibrahim and go in and smash all the idols. That's required at times, right? The community needs to be woken up and the idols need to be smashed.
Yeah.
Many of the times you'll be there as their brother. When God says constantly about the prophets, we send them their brother. Fulan, Shu'aib, we send them their brother. No, we sent them their brother. He says their brother because you're going in there as someone who is sympathetic and empathetic to this community, as a member of that community, and you are valuing your shared experience and not seeing yourself as an individual in contrast to that community. Wa alaikum assalam to.
Alaikum assalam, Kalvar. Yeah, the idea of, I didn't think of this before, of a dhanni idea being embedded, like within very valuable things to the community, that you can't just isolate it, no matter how strong your arguments are. Obviously, it seems idealistic, but also the thing you offer in exchange does not even serve the function that idea was doing for all these years. That idea or that concept, whatever, kept people on the religion. It helped them pray. It gave them safety. It was there for them. I'll give you another example, which I think is more imminently damaging. This one is damaging because it can get in the way of ideas, but this one about suffering, when the individual goes through suffering and develops themselves tools of alleviation, they sometimes assume others encounter their troubles in the same ways. And certain things that were hard for them might be hard for others, so easy for them will be easy. But self-image bias, like Sayyid Hassan says in the comments. And this one's more damaging because now I'm reducing the value of certain trials because they didn't happen to have been hard for me personally. There was obviously an easy example of things like, well, it's not hard for me to refuse alcohol because I'm not drunk the culture where it's normal. And yet for those whom it is normal and still refuse to, that is a much bigger of a difficulty. I wonder if the fact that many of these things are subjective makes it a bit harder to deal with, because things like my personal relationship, my personal struggles, my personal ideas, my personal journey, no one's really seeing the ups and downs of that. Is there a way we can vocalize our experiences in a way that we can be understood by each other? Is there a better way of having this conversation than it is happening?
Yeah, definitely a better way. What is that better way? Again, there's when we think about a solution, we have to think about a solution which doesn't fragment the community, right? So it preserves the community and preserves community element, and it preserves the benefits that come with with community identity and community spirit.
Right.
Because some solutions amount to no longer having any form of shared identity, which is just counterintuitive. So we have to think of a solution which takes this into consideration. And rather than answer that question directly, what I want to talk about is how sometimes these practices go back to that question of, how does something speculative get tied into something so deeply and intricately?
The word embedded use is actually a very good word to describe the process.
Yeah, it's embedded into it. And what happens is, for example, when you're trying to teach your child an ethical trait, an ethical character, a moral trait, a moral practice and conduct, what you do is you first tell them, it's good to be kind to people, it's good to respect people. You tell them the rule, generally speaking, that like this is how parents will act, and this is how communities will pass it down. Then they'll give them examples of it. So the first they'll say it's good to respect people. Then they'll tell them, for example, we're from the UK. We'll tell people that it's good to open the door for people. That's a sign of respect. And we'll teach respect through practices. So we give them the principle that respect is good and we have to respect individuals and others. And then we'll give them examples through the practices that that exist within our particular society, right? We'll say, for example, that it's important to mourn Imam Hussein, and then we'll give practical or particular examples of what that respect and that mourning and that love will look like. Send salawat, wear this color clothing, don't do that, don't, you know. So we'll create practices that preserve that value. Now, over time, it becomes so part and parcel of the culture. And then slowly a culture is created. So the culture of opening the door in the UK, right? You can just ask someone, why are you opening the door? At that point, they're not going to sit down and have a ethical discussion with you. They're just going to think it's the nice thing to do. And why is it the nice thing to do? It's embedded within the culture now, which is the culture is now passing down. It's not just the parents that are passing this down, it's the entire society which is passing down these cultures. And which is
without the initial facts or events which created that practice.
Exactly. Without even the premise, like the clear premises or the story that created this culture. Now there's an immense benefit to this, right? But there's also a danger to this. And this is that question of stagnation comes from. When something becomes embedded and it's passed down unconsciously or subconsciously, then it loses that dynamic element of it. Now, what Islam is trying to do for people is that it's trying to even get these simple practices, and it's trying to throw God in the mix. It's trying to make you conscious about them. So when you eat, do you not look at what you eat? Right? What is wrong with man that he does not look at what he eats? Sayru fil ard. Look around. When you're just traveling on the earth, make it a conscious. Islam is turning these things that we do, especially those people at that time were doing regularly, we put into our context. Things that we do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, which are part and parcel of life, and it's trying to make them conscious again. It's trying to make these acts go, because it's important to pass them down through these mechanisms of culture and cultural practices, customs and the like. And I believe that that's actually what the Prophet was trying to do. The Prophet was trying to create a culture with religious teachings as in such a way that a few generations down, people don't need to look externally to find out what they need to do. So a person doesn't need to constantly be referring and asking someone that, hey, I found a really good book at the library, it's really expensive, and I saw that no one was using it, can I keep it or not? Right? Essentially, they're asking you, can I steal this book from the library? And it's a tricky question, and it has, like, you know, there's different nuances and stuff, whatever have you. But what my point is here is that the training was supposed to be such that you should have known the answer. The amount of times that you had to go external to find the answer to an external source, whether that's a book or scholar or whatever, the amount of time, I'm not saying that it was supposed to remove authority, but the amount of times that you were dependent on the authority was supposed to decrease because of your internalization of the teachings, right? So how are these teachings internalized? They're internalized through customs, through practices. But what happens if these customs and practices become robotic and they go into the state of becoming subconscious and, you know, being done unconsciously without that consciousness? Is we stagnate because you just keep doing them. You pass them on and you don't know why you're doing them. And then because you don't know why you're doing them, or because you're not thinking about, or you know only at the very surface level why you're doing them, you're not trying to improve it. So, for example, the door opening example, very nice thing to do. But if you think about it deeply, right, you think about it further, you realize that the whole point of this was to respect the individual. And what is me opening a door have to do with respect? It's because I'm showing that I'm trying to make something easier for them. So I'm doing an act of service. Okay, so it's the act of service which was to show respect to them, right? Okay, so what is the act of service? Now, when you think about it deeper, you realize that me standing there holding the door is actually sometimes not an act of service, because this person has to run and get to the door. And so
I've opened it because I'm angry with them to get out the house.
get out of the house. Yeah,
Completely antithetical to the point of it in the first place. No.
exactly. So what's happening here now is that because we've become accustomed to them, and we're
Yeah,
following them as customs. We're not thinking of them beyond, like we're not thinking about the principle behind them, and then hence we do them even though they become a nuisance, right? Whereas the whole point was that the action itself is not bad, but it's supposed to be done when it achieves that particular purpose. And if it's not achieving that, then we should consciously rethink what we're doing at that particular time. So what I'm saying is like, yeah, the Prophet, the way he was actually even trying to pass down Islam was through these customs, but
yeah,
the goal was to keep it conscious at each stage. So it does become internalized. It becomes part and parcel of our daily lives. It becomes second nature, but at the same time, we're engaging with it consciously.
yeah, definitely. That's a bit. I like the idea that we go from Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu to Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu to kataballahu ala iman ala qulubihim. Like at some point, that iman keeps changing in our relation to it. Keeps changing. And I think your example you've given is probably the best example of the difference between stagnation and dynamism. It's in the actions that we do and our understanding of them. That is a very good example. I want to mention, because this is usually when people come with questions and personal thoughts, and I'm getting a few comments here. It said, how long do you actually have before you got to go to gardening? How long do we have you for?
Let's go on for another 10 minutes.
All right, because this room will close in 2 minutes, because it's on an hour thing.
So we can stop now and then come back in for a quick
like just a Q&A with people. So whilst those listening, is obviously follow Monthly Reflections, the name, so that you see me open up the new room. But any of your questions, I'll keep a note of the ones that have already come in. Ask them then, and then inshallah for the last 10 minutes I'll stretch to 15. I know how to talk to them. I'll stretch to 15, and then we'll discuss them. So let me see this one. Okay, got it. All right, okay. See you in a second. So those of you who actually joined the one just before, a bit late, you missed the best part of the discussion, which was when said Hadi looked at my radiator and guessed the precise part of London that I'm in. It doesn't help that I'm about like literally a few yards away from a very close relative of his, but still, like, I'm so impressed by that one.
I have to put my Britishness, my Londonness.
It's mad. I think I'm more British than you, and I can't believe that you did that. In any case, now is a good time for people to add questions about this topic of dynamism and stagnation. And obviously, we've looked at loads of examples about the experiential way and the subjective way, and we went quite deep today, but alhamdulillah. There was a question from in the previous room. It was a private question, which was about obstacles and burdens, obstacles and burdens that we have upon ourselves. The question was if you could explain the idea of how we place them on ourselves, and why it is, or how it is that we place on ourselves obstacles in our own understanding rather than it coming from the collective. Yeah, it's a good question. What do you think?
So obviously there's some obstacles that we place on ourselves, and that's much to do with our mindset. There's some obstacles that are placed upon us and we don't have a lot of say in that. And there's some obstacles that we choose, some burdens, I should say, that we choose to continue carrying with us. It's important when we're thinking about the burdens that we're faced with and the burdens that we have, that we reflect and identify exactly what it is. Is it something that I have a choice in? Is it something that's coming from me? Is it a mindset that I have? Is it something I don't have a choice in? But is it something that I don't have a choice in, but I can choose not to carry with me, right? Because there's burdens that, you're born in a particular family, you're born in a particular circumstance. At this point right now, you're in a particular financial situation, you're in a particular situation in your relationships, in your marriage maybe. And some of them, there's not a whole lot you can do immediately. You can make plans to deal with them gradually. And there's some ones that, you can't really choose. You can't really change anything about them. But what you can do is you can decide whether you'll be carrying them. And what I mean by carrying them is that whether you're going to allow them to stay in your line of sight, in your rearview mirror, or you're just going to think, okay, this is something which I don't have a control over. This is a particular aspect of mine that I don't have a control over, but I'm not going to carry this burden with me, drag it with me. I'm going to accept that it's there. I'm gonna do whatever my duties are in relation towards it. And then I'm gonna focus on what I can do and what I'm able to do, and I'll focus on that aspect. The obstacles that we put on ourselves because of our mindset, those are also difficult to deal with. And it's not always clear for us to realize which ones we placed upon ourselves, which are, self-created burdens, and which ones come from an external source. And just because of the way that our mind works. But it's a healthy thing to do with just to check ourselves occasionally and often, and really try and understand, why do I think about this issue in this particular way? Why am I viewing this thing in this particular way? And can I really change it or not? And, stepping, walking things back to their origination, where they came from, how they started, where they started, what they're linked to. The problem is because thinking itself is a burden for many people, because we've become so unaccustomed towards it. And, the way that the world is moving, we're becoming less and less accustomed to thinking. I remember when on the phones, when the phone started having that feature of you just swipe, right? Or you can predictive text. I turned all of that stuff off, and I've tried to ignore it as much as possible, except in the case where I know that my spelling is terrible and it's giving me the correct spelling. But if I know the spelling, I try not to select that predictive text or go that easy route. And I write a lot, unfortunately for many people. But
you should start a spelling bee, given this point.
with the rest of the Indians in the US. I would always avoid those, because I told myself I don't want to become accustomed to not writing, because writing itself helps me think. But slowly, people are, you're still writing, you're still producing something, but I want to keep some elements of the process, because I need my mind to be doing a type of work. So the same thing happened with thinking. The way that the technology is moving faster, and it's progressing in a way where it's just making us have to do less work and think less. Us as individuals, not those who are creating the technology. So we really we have to become comfortable again with having to think about things, spending time thinking about things, being comfortable thinking about things, not crumbling to the anxiety of having to think about things, because thinking is now very much and very often associated or connected in pop culture with anxiety, right, as a cause of anxiety. There's ways to think.
Does overthinking lead to shock or staying stuck? So that's exactly what you're describing. But the opposite spectrum, it's the idea of thinking too much about something. Again, anxiety.
And that's interesting, because there's so many beautiful elements within the Islamic framework and the structure of the ideas that we have, where you can bring them in and they play a role. So, for example, you've been told about tafakkur, tadabbur, nazm of your umur, and all of these different things, right? Tandeem of your umur and everything. But then you've also been told about tawakkul, right? So you bring these things together. You bring in the work, and then you bring in the perspective. The perspective here is that essentially it's in God's hand.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, God is the one that decides. But you also understand that God requires you to put in work yourself too. God has expectations of you to use the faculties that He's given you and the organs that He's given you. He has an expectation of you to use them in the correct way, but with the mentality that I will do what I will, and the ma tawfiq illa billah, right? The tawfiq is with God, or the result is with God. So that's there. So the balance has to come with bringing together these different teachings that we have, right? And even these exist outside of religious teachings as well, right? People within the spiritual space also speak about this. Let go, because you don't have control over it, so don't stress about it. That's a different thing, though. We're saying that someone has control over it. there's not some random thing, an entity, which a phenomenon which is
Tafakkur is
uncontrollable.
as much of a choice as tafakkur, is what we're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it's an active choice that you're having to do tawakkul and to do tafakkur. Both of those are active decisions that you're making. One thing is like our difference with those spiritual teachings is that we don't think that these are uncontrollable phenomenon that no one has a control over. There's something has a control over them,
that's
and
true.
they can be. But what I'm trying to say that they do exist in even the wider discourse. Well,
That's a good answer. Adding the existence of I don't know how to say, not non-thinking, but thinking in that specifically defined ways is helpful.
tools that God has given us, like the divine tools. Yeah.
Very good. If there are any other questions or reflections, please do. I'm pretty sure that answered that question very comprehensively. Actually, not comprehensively, but in itself, it had the answers that it needed. Anyone else, please do add any questions or reflections you have, inshallah, while we've still got the room open. I'll do a quick one to you, said, and then if anyone wants, they can add a question. When we were thinking about this idea of stagnation and dynamism, is there anything which we didn't discuss which you think is important to include in the conversation? Obviously, we were just talking, but are there any ideas which you think we didn't get a chance to touch on, which you think the listener should be aware of before they go? Or do you reckon what's been said is pretty much a good telling of that story?
It's definitely not like a complete telling of that story, but at the end of the day, I mean, I came into this thinking that we're going to have a conversation. And wa alaikum assalam to all. I came in thinking of this as conversation, not as nothing more than that. And a good conversation, you always just leave. And I know I'm not a good conversationalist because obviously the way I speak and how much I speak, I'm not like that in person, by the way.
No, firstly, guys, on the Monthly Reflections podcast, we only have good conversationists, and that's why I said Hadi is here. Carry
on. But yeah, just if there's things to think about, everyone's going to take something. Something might resonate with some people, and some people nothing might resonate, and that itself is a lesson. That don't go into every room.
Don't open every room thinking you're going to get it.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes something.
That person, please, if that person, I'm sorry you've listened for this long, but I have loads of other episodes with different people. So no, exactly. I'm joking.
No, it's the truth. There's plenty out there. Everyone is at different parts of their journey, and they will benefit from. They'll benefit from different things. I'm a big believer in that. I have a particular area that I like to focus on, particular types of discussions that I focus on, and I know that's not for everyone, and not everyone enjoys that, and I have no issue with that whatsoever. I have no problem with that. I lose no sleep over that not being something that everyone wants. Or
no, we'll blame the collective for not being able to appreciate that aspect of the personal.
No. It's like I said, it's back to that story that some of the things that some people had messaged me. Someone had asked me that, and I'm sorry, I should have, because the gap has become big since I last read it. Someone said, "Can you share some personal stories about difficult times with religion that you had?" What about certain personality traits? This is an interesting question.
Wait, stop. Were you about to share a personal story and this is an escape strategy to not, be vulnerable with us? Like,
no, I'm saying the question is really good, and maybe the question will open up to...
I would hate to upset that person.
The question, are there personality traits that resist change?
Stay stuck.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting discussion, because what we have... So, for example, we have even within... So first of all, the short answer is that yes, there are personality traits, right? There's character traits and personality traits that find it difficult, not just they resist change, right? And not always because they have an aversion to the new belief. They have a problem with the actual new belief. It's more the change that is that brings about that anxiety for them, or it makes them anxious or hesitant, because change has... Some of us change ideas and opinions like it's clothing. we change affiliations, because we don't understand that a change in a view necessitates a change in many other things. Like, we don't realize that our views and ideas are linked together, and together, they're supposed to, the way we live is all supposed to be linked to our ideas and all of this stuff, right? So some people, there's no connection between that. They're not thinking about their life, so they're living heedlessly. One day they're living one way, the next day they're living the other way, because, you know. So for those people, yeah, they can change, and but some people, it's the resistance is there because of they understand that a change in the viewpoint necessitates a change in behavior,
Right.
and they see the chain, they see the dominoes, and how are they going to start falling, and they resist it because of that sort of apprehension to all the dominoes falling in that direction, right? So it's not because they have any evil intention or bad intentions. It's actually because they're in tune with the implications of change and what change requires.
They're resisting lifestyle choices that they don't want to do.
Exactly. So now this can be, and this has many different elements, and this is sometimes it's a good thing, because some people change too often and too quickly. Sometimes that hesitance and resistance to change is good, because change itself sometimes is attractive.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes the easy way out, right? Changing because of external factors is sometimes the weak and easy option, rather than resisting it and being like, actually, wait, should I change? Why should I change, right? So it really depends on the situation. And we have, so for example, right now, a lot of like people that are interested in psychology today will talk about the Jungian archetypes, and they talk about whether
There's a question before about collective and personal spirit. That was a very Jungianly phrase, and I didn't want to go into it, but it's common in that discourse. Even in Islamic discourse, you'll find.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the idea is that do we lean towards the certain personality types, and do certain things lean towards particular behaviors?
Yeah.
And and we have that actually in the hadith, in the whole chapter of Tina, it's in Al-Kafi as well. I believe it's the second chapter of Al-Kafi. The beginning of the second chapter of Al-Kafi talks about the clay with which we're made. And in that, there's a very interesting discussion of how the clay that we're made with can impact our inclinations and things that we incline towards.
There's
so that's a
hadith on that.
And it's very difficult those require a lot of thought, because you can fall into jabr and tafweed with that. You can get into the issue of predestination when it comes to those narrations. So you have to deal with them with a lot of delicacy.
You could fall into accidental racism as well from those discussions.
A lot of things, yeah. There's a lot of data, and there was actually very difficult. So when Ali Imran came to Hausa, me and Ali Imran, we said Ali Imran on Vector Online. When he joined the Hausa, I had been there like a year or two already, and we'd known each other before. So when he came, I was like, hey, let's do Mubahatha of Al-Kafi.
I remember this story, yeah.
Yeah, and so this was one of the first hadith Mubahathas amongst the Western students at the time. And we were actually told by a lot of people not to do it. But what people don't know is that it was actually teachers who told us to do it.
Interesting.
So it was a teacher, and they said, start with the second volume of Al-Kafi and skip the chapter of Tina. And obviously, bin Ali Imran being like very good and individual,
extra on those
we started
and then published it.
Yeah, and I'm really happy I did. Like it was like a whoa, what's going on here? What are these? Like, do they make sense? What's happening?
Yeah.
But they set a set of questions in my mind that I was tackling for years after, like almost a decade after that, was still. And it was only until like a few years ago that I really was able to settle with them and really appreciate it from a different angle. Back to the personal story. Someone had asked about, they wanted to know about a time that I was in a difficult position when it comes to religiosity, and this happened to me a few times. Like And for me, it happened to me while I was at Hausa. It only happened to me once outside of the Hausa before I went to Hausa. It only happened once, and it was a very short-lived, momentary thing. When I went to the Hausa, it happened to me multiple times. I went through like mid-Hausa crisis, what I'll call now. And it was like points where I realized that principles that I'd held or things that I held so strongly were actually open for discussion.
Yeah.
And I reacted in accordance to the level of certainty I held those positions with. So because I held them so strongly,
It was
my
traumatic.
reaction to it was traumatic.
Yeah. I think a lot of us go through that to a degree or another growing up.
They do, yeah. And for me, I think the most difficult part when it came to religion was that it was, I could always rationalize everything. And when I say rationalize everything, it's not always that I could make everything make sense. It was that I always knew that my ability to make something make sense or not was not indicative of it being correct or not.
True.
And because I had that, I never felt I never ever felt I had a good reason to consider religion wrong. Like there were points where I was just like, this is not making sense to me. There's so much issues. There's so many answers that I'm not getting. There's so many things that's happening here that is like I can't relate to. I find problematic. But I couldn't tell myself because of that means this is wrong. The most I could ever get to was it's not right for me, right? But what happened is I stuck through it. I stuck with it because I saw the good. And for a while, even there was like, I stuck with it because I saw pragmatic benefits, but I stuck through it. And I also saw the beauty beyond the pragmatic side. I saw beauty. So I saw it giving me answers that my heart just felt that they were correct, even though I couldn't rationalize them.
Yeah.
And as time went on and I learned more about myself and I learned more about the world, and I learned more about the religion itself as well. So actually, it was like over the years, because I started reading hadith and all that quite early, it wasn't that I was getting exposed to new hadith. It was just like I was revisiting those hadith and those ayat and everything in my mind or rereading them with these new experiences and this new maturity that I was gaining. A lot of those issues got resolved. So I don't want to tell anyone that they won't have issues or it won't be difficult. And I think that's part of a dynamic and living religion, that you're going to have to deal with it with how you are at the point, right?
Yeah.
You're an individual, you're a living being, living with another living dynamic entity phenomenon, and you're trying to interact with it. And it's saying something. And the problem is when you can't hear it speaking because of whatever reasons, you think there's a conflict and you're shouting at each other, right? You think you're shouting at each other. But what's happening is you're not hearing it. And why you're not hearing it, in most cases, in most times, it's because you're not seeing it in its whole light. You're not seeing it in its completeness. Sorry. So, when that started happening and I realized that with my increased maturity, it goes back to that point that we're still on a journey, and I realized this journey is ongoing.
Yeah.
I'm in no rush and I'm no need of jumping ship. I'm part of a beautiful community. I'm part of we have amazing values. There's so much good in it. I have no reason to want to be part of any other group. So, yeah, there was difficult points. I'm saying there were really difficult points where, and some things might still not make sense, but I realized that there's no need for me to take a strong stance on any of these issues. It goes back to that point I was making, that scholar, When I realized that my views are changing, I realized that then I have to be humble that a problem I have now might no longer be a problem 5 months down the line. And it's happened. Someone came to me once, and I hope they're not listening right now. This has happened multiple times, actually, especially when I was in London. It happened.
They're all listening after.
Yeah, it happened more times than I can count, if I want. Well, not more than time to count, but it happened a bunch of times that people came to me and they're like, I'm having, I can't pray. Like, I just can't. I was like, okay. And I was like, they're like, I want you to convince me that I have to pray. And I was like, look, all the arguments. I don't need to, I'm not going to repeat the arguments to you. I was like, just don't rule it out from your life. Don't rule it out, right? I was like, go and reflect, think over some things, and just know prayer is there for you if you need to connect to God and you're not sure of how to do it, you're not sure where to start, you're not sure, what you should be on one leg, should your hands be like this? And I was like, prayer's there. God is the Prophet experienced this. He tried it and telling us it's work. It's tried and tested by a valuable individual. If you don't accept the Prophet, whether someone, a sage, a few sages in history have said that this worked for them, right? I was like, just have it there in the back of your mind. Don't rule it out. So these same individuals are, okay, yeah, I'm going to stop praying. I was like, I'm not encouraging you to, but if that's what you need to do right now, then, and because this was very common during the time of the Prophet, right? Because people was like, the Quran says they'd leave, we're told that they'd leave, they'd join Islam in the morning and they'd leave in the afternoon, or they'd join in the afternoon. But the Prophet was able to get these individuals somehow and create an ummah out of them.
Wow.
Like these people that are stepping in and out of Islam. He was like, look, there's something going on here. These people, they need something to solidify them and fortify them here. And that's going to come with the approach of the Prophet and the way that the Prophet is going to teach them this religion. Eventually, they're going to stop hopping out. And eventually, they're going to become the same people that will defend this religion and not take it lightly if people hop out. Right? And that's why, some of the apostasy laws they developed later on and they're much stricter. They became much stricter as time went on than they were in the original time of the Prophet.
Yeah.
So anyways, I told this individual, I was like, don't rule it out, but do what you want. I was like, just don't forget about God. I was like, don't think that because you have certain questions. I was like, ruling out God from the equation and trying to figure out life without God, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work. Now you can define God as how you want. You can call him what you want. You can, you want to try and different pronouns, whatever. We have to be genuine about it, be sincere about it. Check yourself. Don't just follow what you think. And this person came back after like 3 months and much sooner than I expected. I was expecting like 6 months to a year. They came back after 3 months and they said, I started praying. I'm starting praying again. And I don't want to miss a prayer anymore. And now that we talked, and then they said, but I feel, and this is one of many examples. Like I'm just giving this one because it was like this time period was so short.
The principle is consistent in that, and I think we'll end on this. But it's a very beautiful point where even if you don't know now, give yourself time to figure it out. And give yourself time to figure out. Don't let go. Don't leave it until you've had time to actually just in your own pace think of it. I know you've got to go and do gardening. So I'll read Sister Zina's beautiful point after, and then we'll end. Which is, thank you so much for your honesty. I've always had such a naive stance on religion, thinking if you study it in your life, if you study it, your life will be easier and make more sense. I never thought of it as two live entities colliding. Yeah, exactly. That's a very nice, beautiful thing to take away from this discussion, definitely.
You have to come to harmony. So you find harmony with it, you find peace with it, and that comes from conversations. So was it?
Yeah.
Okay, I was saying, two living things, and they can only come to peace if they discuss and they talk and they converse, and they come to an understanding.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how living things interact. Even plants have to discuss with one another when they're growing, so that they both have space to grow and move, right? And any living thing needs to be in engagement and interaction with another living thing to decide how they're both going to coexist. And then with religion, the beautiful thing is that you get to a place with these ideas is that you don't coexist, you become one existence. You're no longer two separate entities, because now the religion lives through you, and that's the goal. And that's what we mean by dynamic religion. Someone asked what we mean by dynamic. We mean an understanding of religion and a relationship with religion, which is conscious at all points, which is constantly growing and developing and strengthening and going deeper. Not that you change your religion or you change your views that all of a sudden you develop and God is now two, or that you can see. No, it's that your understanding of the oneness of God increases. I think we can end. However you want to end the bus, whatever you do, your dua.
No. We'll end, and the whole point is, ironically, the answer is we need to do it together as well. We need to help each other on the way. We don't do it alone. And that's, I think, a beautiful thing to remember in these nights of Shahr Ramadan as well, and the days we have left to stay together and to help each other, and to follow the podcast for all of these discussions which we are on together.
Definitely follow.
Monthly reflections. Can you give us a quick shout out? Go on, say it, Hadi.
Yeah, follow Ramadan Reflections. I think, mashallah, boss, you do it in Arba'een, Muharram, and Shahr Ramadan, right?
Yeah, we're gonna leave the beaten track soon. Don't worry. But at the moment, we've been doing
Yeah.
series and obviously once a month we do a series, just one-off podcast every month. That's why it's called Monthly
Okay.
Reflections.
Anything that helps us, if you're finding any of them giving you something to think about, it's worth supporting.
Alhamdulillah.
And thank you, boss, for facilitating it.
No, thank you, Sayyidina, for coming on. A real honor to have you. I miss you, so I got that out of the discussion as well. And
It was wonderful being with you.
alhamdulillah. Take care of yourself, and to all the listeners, take care of yourself, inshallah. Pray for us in your dua. We'll see you tomorrow in tomorrow's discussion around about this time as well. And said Hadi, hopefully we'll see you next time you drop by the UK or I'm in the States. I don't know.
Inshallah.
Come home. Come to Balam soon. Balam is not the same without you.
Barakallah. Thank you. Inshallah. I look forward
Take care,
to seeing you.
Sayyidina. Ma'as-salam. Alhamdulillah. Take care, and bye everybody. Thank you for all those who are listening, inshallah. Pray for us, and we'll see you tomorrow, inshallah, on Monthly Reflections. Hayyakum Allah.